Hi everyone. So you might have noticed that I haven't posted any metal casting videos in quite a while, and that's because I've come to the conclusion that my current furnace is just not going to cut it anymore. I did get a lot of use out of it, but it's degraded quite a bit, and it's went downhill recently. So you can see there's all this rust all over it. The lid doesn't close all the way anymore, so I have to put fire bricks on top of it to seal it completely. The wool on the inside is starting to come out. I've also since learned that the wool is not coated, and it should be to keep the fibers in, because it's kind of like asbestos is what people are saying. So you should have a coating on this. And then finally, it's a little small. So this is one of the crucibles that came with it, and there's very little space around it, and you want enough room for the flame to spiral around the crucible and then have room on top for it to be able to come out of the exhaust hole there. So several problems with this one, and it's a little bit too small, honestly. I'd like to do larger melts in the future, and so I wanted something bigger, I wanted something better designed, and so I figured I'll make it myself. So this is the guide I'm using to design my furnace, The Hobbyist's Guide to Casting Metal by Ben Baker. I found a copy of this online for free, so you can search for that if you want. It's full of great information all about casting, things like safety, casting practices, sand casting, all sorts of things. But what I'm interested in is here, section 6, the furnace construction section. And we'll jump to that. And again, you can download this if you want to get the details on it, but for now, here is the schematic that I'm using. The gist of it is this is a 12-inch diameter furnace. So it's 12 inches across, and it's also 12 inches high. It consists of a furnace shell that's made of 1/8-inch steel. It's got ceramic wool as the insulator, and it's got a hot face to protect and seal the wool. The only difference between this design and the one I'm going to build is this drain hole here. I'm actually not going to do the drain hole, and that exists in case the crucible fails, so the metal will flow out instead of pooling in the furnace and possibly ruining the lining. I'm going to hope that doesn't happen, so we'll see if that ends up being a bad decision or not. But for this whole design, the only thing that I'm not capable of doing myself is the shell, because I'm not a welder. I don't know how to weld. So I actually was in contact with a local welding shop, and I got them these designs and worked with them a little bit to add some handles, feet, that sort of thing. And they're going to build the shell for me. And they were nice enough to let me hang out with them while they were building it, so I got some pretty cool footage to show you. Alright, now the shell is complete, and I'm very pleased with the way it came out. So we've got the lid, it's got exhaust hole in the center. We got 8 holes around the outside for bolts to hold the wool in place. Wool is going to come in on the bottom here. 2 handles to pick it up. And the body's got 2 handles as well. The burner inlet tube down here on the side with 3 set screws. And we got a couple of feet on the bottom to keep this up off the ground a little bit. Basically, it's just a bigger version of my furnace that you've probably seen in other videos. Now I'm going to paint the outside with this high temperature spray paint that I got from the auto parts store. And hopefully that'll protect it from rust and keep it looking nice. The next task is to install the insulating wool. This is a large roll of 2-inch thick Kaowool, and Kaowool is like a ceramic fiber blanket, so it's sort of similar to asbestos, like I said before, so hence the gloves and the respirator mask that I'm wearing. First, I cut out the wool for the lid, and I did this just simply by putting the lid on top of the wool and using the knife that came with it to cut around it in a circle. And that knife that comes with it is excellent. It cuts through it like butter. And here it is all cut out. And notice it's also important to work with this stuff outside because of all the fibers that are generated. I probably should have also been wearing pants and a long sleeve shirt. And then I used the lid as a template to cut a second circle, and that's going to be the base layer for the furnace. Next was the wall, which I made by calculating the circumference of a 12-inch circle and cutting out the appropriate length of a rectangle. And that gets a little difficult because the wall has that 2-inch thickness, so I didn't quite get the calculation just right, but after some extra cutting and stuffing in extra little bits and pieces, I think I got it reasonably well in there. To make the burner inlet hole, I used a 1 1/4-inch spade bit to just sort of drill through the wool, and in retrospect that might not have been the best idea. It kind of ended up getting wool everywhere. Now that I think about it, probably would have been easier to just get like a pipe and grind the end of it so that it's sharp and just poke it in there sort of like a big cookie cutter. But this seemed to work out pretty well. Also, I didn't film this part because you couldn't really see anything, but I cut out a bit of a funnel on the inside of this burner tube to give the flame space to expand. Back to the lid, I needed to poke holes through the wool for each of the 8 bolt holes, and to do that I used a sharpened yard flag that I sharpened on my grinder. I wanted to do this part now because otherwise it would have been a lot harder to do once the hot face was on, which you'll see in the next step. For the hot face, I'm using a material called Satanite. It's a very high temperature refractory. The Satanite comes as a powder, and you mix it with water until you get a sort of sour cream consistency. They don't really tell you exactly how much water, what the ratio is, so you kind of have to play around with it a little bit. So I had to mix it, check it, add some more water, mix it, add some more Satanite, that kind of thing to get the right balance. I do like this mason jar system that I'm using. I saw somebody else use it in a video because you can make small batches at a time, and it's really easy to mix everything together. You also want to make this first layer a little more watery than they recommend so that it soaks into the Kaowool fibers really well, and then the next layers that you paint on can be that sour cream thickness. To apply the Satanite, all you do is paint it on with a foam brush. You want to apply it in several thin layers. The process here is to paint on a layer, you let it dry, then you cure it, and repeat that process until you build up the thickness that you want. What I did for the lid here was I put pieces of wire into each of the holes that I made earlier, so I didn't just paint over them in this step. It kind of makes it look like a birthday cake. And you can see when it's done, it's got a nice even coating over all the wool surfaces, and we'll let that dry. After each layer, you want to let it air dry until it's totally dry. The color will change from being dark gray to a light gray, and it'll harden up a little bit, but still be pretty powdery. I tried speeding it up with this heat gun, but I don't know if that really did all that much. The next step is to cure the Satanite using heat. You want to heat it slowly and gently to start with, just to drive off the last little bits of moisture. So I started the furnace with the air vent closed and just barely opened it. And I let it heat like that for about 10 seconds, and then you let it cool down. It smells like burnt marshmallows. Then I turned the burner back on, opened up the air vent a little more, ran it for a little bit longer, and repeated that a few times until I got the whole interior up to red heat. And that is the point where it actually starts to cure. So you might have noticed a problem. It's very hard to cure the mating surfaces between the lid and the body this way, since the flame just can't get out there. So you see there's that ring of darker material around the outside. To solve that, I bought a weed burner, and I've never used one of these before, and let me tell you, I was not prepared for how powerful these things are. Holy shit! Oh my god! That hardly seems necessary. Okay, next step is going to be to secure the wool to the lid so it doesn't fall out. When it was just wool, it's probably light enough where it'd be fine, but now that I'm coating it with Satanite, you know, that's going to weigh it down, and it might possibly drop out of the lid. So we need to attach them together. My original plan was to have bolts, which is why I've got these 8 holes in the lid here, but thinking about that, I think the bolts are going to get eaten away in the heat inside the furnace, and I wouldn't want to have to replace them. So new plan. We're going to use some of this Kaowool wire, which is resistance wire, and I think it's what they use in like toasters for the heating element, so it's, you know, meant to take high temperature. So what I'm going to do is just thread that kind of back and forth through all these holes. Well, that turned out to be a little harder than I thought it was going to be, but looks okay on the top at least. The bottom doesn't look so hot, but I think the Satanite is a little forgiving, so I'll just paint right over all that and no one will be the wiser. The reason I did it this way, by the way, I still have 1 or 2 coats left to go on the lid here. I wanted to do it like this so that when I put the second coat on, the wire is like built in to the Satanite. So then it'll really be in there nice and good and hold everything in place. So the lid is complete and totally fired, but there's still a problem. If we look at the side here, it's uneven. So see there's lots of hills and valleys along there. So that means that this will not sit very well against the body. The body has the same problem. There's a lot of unevenness. So to solve that, I used a hand sander on the top of the body here and around the edges of the lid. Basically the 2 spots where they meet. And that got the surfaces reasonably level. Then I put the lid on and spun it around to grind off the rest of the high spots. And while I was doing this, I would also occasionally put a flashlight in the furnace and look at it from the side to check for gaps around the edges. If you could see light, there were still gaps and it needed to be sanded a bit more. Excuse me. Do you mind? Stop. Stop. And finally, here it is. It's finished. The Satanite is fully cured, and the lid and body made up very nicely now. For the burner, I'm actually reusing the burner from my previous furnace, and I designed it so that this would fit right in there, no problem. And now it's time to test it out. You might have noticed at the beginning of the video that the crucibles that I've been using are just about as beat up as the furnace is. See, they're gross. There's a lot of caked on stuff on the inside, and it's starting to crack, and I'm losing confidence in this. You know, that the last thing you want is for a crucible full of molten metal to break on you. So this needs to be retired. And I've got some new crucibles, and these are better quality crucibles. They're salamander clay graphite crucibles. But before you use a crucible for the first time, you have to heat treat it, do a little bit of tempering first, just to remove any moisture that's been absorbed into it. Because if you put it straight in the furnace and there's some water absorbed in there, then it can flash to steam and cause cracks, and you don't want any of that. So the way to do that is we first heat it up in this is an old toaster oven that I have, and I've got it on 300 degrees for about an hour. And I think I'm actually going to crank it up to 400 in a minute and let it run for the full hour at 400, because I believe 400 is the correct temperature. But anyways, this slow heating part is just to drive off any absorbed moisture. And once it's hot, then we'll put it into the furnace and actually crank it up to red heat, and that'll really drive off all the moisture, and then it'll be correctly tempered for use. On kind of low heat until it gets to red hot, and then we'll crank it up to full. For this first run, I'm going to be melting some precast aluminum scrap. This is better than soda cans because this is stuff that has been cast before, so it is the proper alloy. You see the line there? That's the parting line from the mold that they used. So all of this was precast aluminum, so this is the good quality stuff. Took the plinth with me. And so here's what I got. 1.6 pounds of beautiful casting alloy. I sanded them a little bit just for presentation's sake, so they look a little bit nicer. But the reason that this particular alloy is really good for casting is because of shrinkage. This alloy doesn't shrink nearly as much as pure aluminum. So for comparison, here is a bar of soda can aluminum, which is not casting grade, and you can see this big dimple in the middle, how much it's actually shrunk. So let me try to give you a little bit better view of that. There's a measuring tape I'll put down in there, and so you see how far down that goes. And if we compare that to what this bar has, practically no shrink at all. It's almost totally flat up here, which is great. And so that sort of thing is nice for casting because you can keep details and stuff, and you don't get defects when you do a cast. So this will be some great stock for future projects. So here's the Crucible after use. I got most of the aluminum out afterwards. I cleaned it off camera. That's just a little thin coating, so that shouldn't hurt anything. But this actually looks quite a bit different than what it started off as. And so here is what it used to look like. And a lot of this black coating has disappeared. So that's interesting. Hopefully not a bad thing. These crucibles are supposed to be high quality, so we'll see how it goes. And then here's the inside of the furnace after the first use. It's gotten a lot more tan now, which is a little bit different, but that's what Satanite is supposed to do. It's supposed to change colors as you use it. And same thing with the lid. You can see where the heat was hitting. It's a lot more tan. A little bit cracked too, but that shouldn't be a problem. And if it is, the good thing with Satanite is you can always just paint more on and repair it. So I just wanted to give you a sense of scale for this new furnace. So this was the first one that I bought and used, I think, in one video. And then I wanted to upgrade, and I got this one, and that's the one I've been using until recently. And then this is the new one. So it's a little bigger. It's funny because it's like each furnace could have melted the previous one. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks a lot for sticking around, and I look forward to using this furnace in future videos.